respected dignitaries, today I, Suhani Mittal, on the behalf of the Anatomy Department, under the guidance of Pankaj sir, is here to present the topic ear. Ear consists of three parts: external ear, middle ear, and internal ear. The part from the auricle till the tympanic membrane is the external ear. The part of this containing tympanic cavity is the middle ear, and the part containing semicircular canals, cochlea, ducts is the internal ear. External ear is further classified into two: auricle and external auditory meatus. Auricle, third part containing semicircular canals, cochlea is the internal ear. Semicircular canals, cochlea, and vestibule is the internal ear. External ear consists of two parts: auricle and external auditory meatus. Auricle or pinna is a trumpet-like undulation projection from the side of the head which collects sound vibrations from the ear. The external auditory meatus extends from the auricle to the tympanic membrane. It is a 24 mm long tube and it is a S-shaped curve. The middle ear is a narrow slit air-filled cavity The middle ear is a narrow air-filled cavity which is contained within the petrous part of temporal bone. The measurements of tympanic cavity are as follows. Its vertical and interposterior diameters are 15 mm. At roof it is 6 mm. At base it is 4 mm, and at the center it is 2 mm. The middle ear is sandwiched between external and internal ear. The middle ear also consists of three auricles, three ossicles which transmits sound vibrations from the It consists of six walls: anterior wall which has two bony canals, the upper canal for tensor tympani and the lower canal for auditory tube. It also contains internal carotid artery which separates it from the tympanic cavity. Posterior wall which contains adductors to mastoid antrum. It connects tympanic cavity to the mastoid antrum, and a hollow pyramidal eminence which contains stapedius muscle. Then the roof or the tegmental wall which contains a thin bony plate of tegment tympani which separates the tympanic cavity from the middle cranial fossa. Then roof, the jugular wall, it contains tympanic branch of glossopharyngeal nerve and internal jugular vein. Medial or labyrinthine wall, it contains promontory which is formed due to the first rounded prominence which is due to the first basal turn of cochlea. Fenestra cochleae, it is a round small opening behind and below the promontory. Fenestra vestibuli, it is a reniform aperture above and behind the promontory. Sinus tympani, it is a depression behind the promontory which indicates the position of ampulla, and it also consists of prominence of facial canal. Then lateral or membranous wall, it consists of basically muscular wall which is tympanic cavity, which contains tympanic cavity, and it also has chorda tympani, a branch of facial nerve. The muscles of middle ear are tensor tympani, which basically helps to tenses the tympanic membrane. Stapedius muscle which draws the stapes laterally. Thank you.
A very good afternoon to Pankaj sir and my fellow peers. I, Gauri Sharma, am here to represent the anatomy of the internal ear. Starting with the basic introduction of the internal ear. What is the internal ear? Internal ear is an intercommunicating system of cavities and canals. It is filled with fluid. It lies medially to the middle ear. The internal ear is composed of two main components, that is the bony labyrinth and the membranous labyrinth. The bony labyrinth is filled with a fluid called the perilymph and is composed of bony cavities and canals. It consists of the cochlea, the vestibule, and three semicircular canals. Within the bony labyrinth is the membranous labyrinth, which is filled with a fluid called the endolymph, and it consists of cochlear duct, saccule and utricle, and three semicircular ducts. Starting with cochlea and the cochlear duct, if we look at the cochlea, it closely represents the shell of a snail. If we coming to the cross of the cochlea, we come across two structures, that is the modiolus and the cochlear canal. The modiolus is a conical bony projection around which the cochlear canal spirals and takes 2 3/4 turns. On the surface of the modiolus, there is a special structure called the spiral lamina, which projects into the cochlear canal and divides it into three sections: the scala vestibuli above, scala tympani below, and the scala media, which is also called the cochlear duct. The scala vestibuli is separated from the cochlear duct by the vestibular membrane or the Reisner's membrane. The cochlear duct is separated from scala tympani by the basilar membrane. The basilar membrane also contains a sensory organ called the spiral organ of Corti, bearing hair cells, which are the sensory receptors for hearing. Coming to the vestibule and the saccule and the utricle, the vestibule is the medial part of the bony labyrinth. It consists of four walls: the anterior wall, the posterior wall, the medial wall, and the lateral wall. The anterior wall bears an opening which leads to scala vestibuli. The posterior wall has 5 openings for the 3 semicircular ducts. The lateral wall communicates with the middle ear cavity. The medial wall contains a spherical opening and an elliptical opening. The elliptical opening lodges the utricle, and the saccule is lodged by the spherical opening. These two recesses are separated by a vestibular crest which bifurcates inferiorly to enclose the cochlear crest. Coming to semicircular canals and the ducts. The bony labyrinth of the internal ear consists of 3 semicircular canals, which is the anterior semicircular canal, the lateral semicircular canal, and the posterior semicircular canal. The anterior semicircular canal is present in the vertical plane at right angle to the long axis of the temporal bone. The lateral semicircular canal is present horizontally, while the posterior semicircular canal is also present in the vertical plane but parallel to the long axis of the petrous temporal bone. Within these semicircular canals,
good morning to the dignitary and to all my fellow mates present here. Today our Palak Garg is here for the anatomy of the internal ear. The internal ear is divided into 2 parts that comprises of the outer bony labyrinth and the membranous labyrinth. The membranous labyrinth is filled with endolymph, and these bony labyrinth and the membranous labyrinth are separated from each other by perilymph. The bony labyrinth comprises of 3 semicircular canals, which are the anterior, which is also known as the superior, the posterior, and the lateral. The vestibule, which opens laterally into the middle ear, and medially it opens into the internal acoustic meatus. And the cochlea, which is a snail shell-like type of organ, which is present into the internal ear, and it has 2 and 3/4 turns. The cochlea is composed of a macula. The cochlea is having a central axis known as the modulus, around which the spiral duct arises, which divides the cochlear duct into 3 compartments, that is the scala tympani above, the scala media, and the scala vestibuli. The inner membranous labyrinth is composed of semicircular ducts, utricle and saccule, and the cochlear duct. Now comes the cochlea, which is divided by the spiral lamina into the scala vestibuli above, scala media in the center, and scala tympani inferiorly. The scala vestibuli and scala media are separated from each other by the help of a membrane known as the Reisner's membrane, which is also called the vestibular membrane. And the scala media and scala tympani are separated by a membrane known as the basilar membrane, which comprises of inner hair cells and outer hair cells, and an organ between them which is known as the organ of Corti, which is there for the help of the hearing purpose. From the organ of Corti comes the cochlear nerve, which connects the internal ear towards the brain. There is a structure known as the helicotrema, which helps in the communication of the scala vestibuli and scala tympani, and aqueduct of cochlea, which connects scala tympani towards the subarachnoid space. The bony The bony labyrinthine which composes the cochlea is connected towards the cochlear duct, which is the membranous labyrinthine, which has organ of Coti and which functions for the hearing purpose. Now comes the vestibule, which has utricles and saccule, which has sensory epithelium known as the macula, which helps in the static balance of the body and detects linear acceleration. Then comes the semicircular canals, which has semicircular duct that has a sensory epithelium of crista, which helps in the kinetic balance and detects angular acceleration of the body.
Good morning, respected dignitaries and my fellow mates. Today I am going to represent my topic, vestibulocochlear nerve. The vestibulocochlear nerve is a purely sensory nerve and it's the eighth cranial nerve which arises from the brainstem at the pontomedullary junction. It exits the cranium via the internal acoustic meatus of temporal bone where it divides into vestibular nerve and the cochlear nerve. It has special somatic efferent fibers which carry sensory information necessary for the maintenance of equilibrium and the hearing from the membranous labyrinth to the internal ear. We have the vestibular nerve which transmits information about motion and position of the head to maintain balance and equilibrium. Now here, as you can see, the vestibular nerve gives off two branches, the superior branch and the inferior branch. The superior branch consists of anterior ampullary nerve, lateral ampullary nerve and the utricle nerve, whereas the inferior branch consists of posterior ampullary nerve and the saccular nerve, which transmits the signal to the vestibular ganglion and then passes through the lateral part of the internal acoustic meatus. It goes to the vestibular nucleus, which is divided into four parts: the superior vestibular nucleus, the medial vestibular nucleus, and the lateral and the inferior vestibular nucleus. The superior vestibular nucleus goes to the vestibular posterior part of the thalamus and then ascend to the internal capsule, which then goes to the different parts of the cortex, which are primary somatosensory cortex, frontal eye field, hippocampus and parahippocampus region, parieto-insular vestibular cortex, and the posterior parietal cortex. The medial part of the vestibular nucleus goes to the MLF, which is the medial longitudinal fasciculus, and the fiber goes to the medial vestibular spinal tract. The lateral vestibular nucleus the fibers from the lateral vestibular nucleus goes to the lateral vestibular spinal tract, and the fibers from the inferior vestibular nucleus goes to the cerebellum, which is located here. Next, we have our cochlear nerve, which is responsible. Yes, sir. So here, the different parts of the cortex are primary somatosensory cortex, the frontal eye field, hippocampus and parahippocampus cortex, and parieto-insular vertebral cortex, and the posterior. Next, we have a cochlear nerve, which is responsible for transmitting auditory signals from the inner ear to the cochlear nuclei. The cochlea is a spiral-shaped fluid-filled cavity in the bony auditory labyrinth that contains the organ of Coti along its basilar membrane. So here we can see that this you can see here is the cochlea, which has spiral ganglion present on it. This cochlear nerve goes to the medial of the internal acoustic meatus and then goes to the cochlear nucleus, which divides into ventral and the dorsal cochlear nucleus. Here, as you can see, the ventral and the dorsal cochlear nucleus are located. The fibers from the ventral and the dorsal cochlear nucleus get crossed over and continue as lateral lemniscus. Some fibers goes to the superior olivary nucleus, which helps in localizing the direction of the sound. Some goes to the nucleus of the lateral lemniscus, which is the pink one, as you can see here. The fibers from the lateral lemniscus then goes to the midbrain, which and then ascend to the inferior colliculus, from where it enters the inferior brachium and then goes to the medial geniculate body. From medial geniculate body, the auditory radiations are then goes to the primary auditory cortex, which is also known as superior temporal gyrus.
Good morning, respected dignitaries and all my fellow mates present here. Today I am here to present on the topic vestibulocochlear nerve. Vestibulocochlear nerve is an 8 cranial nerve. Vestibulocochlear nerve is an 8 cranial nerve and it is a purely sensory nerve. It has no motor function. It consists of two parts. Vestibular part, which is mainly responsible for equilibrium, and the cochlear part, which is mainly responsible for hearing. The functional component of the nerve includes the special somatic afferent fibers which carry necessary information for maintenance of the equilibrium and the hearing. The fibers carrying the sensory information for equilibrium terminates in the vestibular nuclei, and the fibers carrying the sensory information for the hearing terminates in the dorsal and the ventral cochlear nuclei. To understand the vestibulocochlear nerve, first we have to know how the hearing and the balance are perceived. So we will briefly discuss about the internal ear. The internal ear is mainly divided into the vestibular component, the semicircular component, and the cochlear component. The vestibule and the semicircular canals are mainly responsible for the maintenance of the equilibrium, and the cochlear part is mainly responsible for hearing. The yellowish structure we can see here is the bony labyrinth. Within the bony labyrinth is the membranous labyrinth, which is also divided according to its function. Within the vestibule is the saccule and the utricle. Within the semicircular canal, there are 3 semicircular ducts, superior, posterior, and the lateral. And within the cochlea, there are cochlear ducts. Here we can see the endolymphatic duct, which ends in the endolymphatic sac. Between the bony labyrinth and the membranous labyrinth, there is a fluid-filled cavity in which fluid known as the perilymph is present, whose ionic composition is similar to that of the extracellular fluid, so it is low in the calcium and high in the sodium. And the lumen of the membranous labyrinth is filled with the endolymph, whose ionic composition is similar to that of the cytosol, so it is high in the calcium and low in the sodium. Now we will talk about the vestibular system. The vestibular system mainly consists of the vestibular labyrinth, and it also contains the vestibulocochlear nerve. The vestibular labyrinth is also consists of 3 semicircular canals which detect different types of movements like nodding up and down, tilting left and right, and shaking side to side. Now the endolymph present in the membranous labyrinth can shift to the ampulla where the hair cells are present which are the sensory receptors of the vestibular system. At the top of the hair cells, there are many collections of the small cells which are known as the stereocilia. The movement of the endolymph in the ampulla causes the movement of these stereocilia, which causes the release of the neurotransmitter to send information to the brain. The vestibular system also contains the otolith organ. The otolith organ is present within the saccule and the utricle. In this, the otolith organ present within the saccule detects the movements in the vertical plane, and that is present within the utricle detects the horizontal movement.
Good morning, respected sir and my fellow mates. Today, I, Chanchal, is here to present about the vestibulocochlear nerve. So first, vestibulocochlear nerve is the 8th cranial nerve, which is pure sensory, and it has 2 parts. Vestibular part which maintain a sense of equilibrium and balance, while the cochlear part facilitates hearing. Now, before proceeding to talk about vestibulocochlear nerve, we will have a brief introduction about inner ear. So, functionally, on the basis of function, the inner ear is divided into 2 parts. First, that is vestibular part, and second is cochlear part. So, the vestibular part have 2 components, vestibular component and semicircular component. Vestibular component is further divided into 2 more parts, which is saccule and utricle, while the semicircular component have 3 semicircular ducts which lie perpendicular to each other, and inside the semicircular ducts are the semicircular canals. And the cochlear system is having 1 component, which is cochlear component, which have cochlea, and the spiral lamina of the cochlea projects inside the cochlear duct and divide into 2 lips, and these lips further extends as Reznor's membrane and basilar membrane. On the basilar membrane, there are hair receptor cells which are called organ of Corti, which further give rise to the cochlear nerve. So, when we talk about the course of the vestibulocochlear nerve, we can divide into 2 nerves, which is cochlear nerve and vestibular nerve. The first if we talk about from where the cochlear nerve comes, it comes from the dendrites from the organ of corti. Since organ of corti contains two types of cells, which is inner hair cell and outer hair cells. So the dendrites from these hair cells runs off to the spiral ganglion, and the axons from these spiral ganglion run as the cochlear nerve. If we talk about the vestibular nerve, so the macula, these are the receptor cells which are present in saccule as well as utricle. So the macula of saccule give as a saccular nerve, while posterior ampullary crest gives the nerve which is called posterior ampullary nerve. And these two form the inferior division, while the macula of utricle gives rise to utricular nerve, lateral ampullary crest gives rise to lateral ampullary nerve, and anterior ampullary crest gives rise to anterior ampullary nerve. These three nerves together forms the superior division. Now, inferior division and superior division together moves to the vestibular ganglion, which is present on the lateral end of the internal acoustic meatus. The axons from the vestibular ganglion run as the vestibular nerve. Now, cochlear nerve and vestibular nerve run together as vestibulocochlear nerve, which pass through the internal acoustic meatus and pass through the angle between cerebellum and pons and enter the brain stem at pontomedullary junction. Now, if we talk about the vestibular pathway, so after entering at the brain stem, the vestibular nerve moves to the synapse with vestibular nuclear complex, and vestibular nuclear complex is present in upper part of the medulla and lower part of the pons. So, for making it simple, I have made a flow chart. In this flow chart, the vestibular nuclear complex is divided into four parts: is superior vestibular nucleus, medial vestibular nucleus, lateral vestibular nucleus, and inferior vestibular nucleus. The medial vestibular nucleus gives off fibers to the motor nuclei of extraocular muscles via medial longitudinal fasciculus, which forms the vestibulo-ocular reflex. The medial vestibular nucleus also gives fibers to vestibulospinal reflex, which cause the head and neck movement through vestibulospinal tract. Now, the superior vestibular nucleus, the fibers from superior vestibular nucleus runs off to the ventral posterior group of thalamus, which then runs to the internal capsule and the cerebral cortex. Now, from the cerebral cortex, these fibers can run to primary somatosensory cortex or frontal eye fields or parieto-insular cortex or hippocampus and parahippocampus parts. Now, the lateral vestibular nucleus, the fibers from this nucleus also goes to in the form of vestibulospinal tract to vestibulospinal reflex, which maintains the posture and balance along with the medial vestibular nucleus.